Ash, you're asking a creative person this.
I was about to say the same thing.
That's a good question, and that's...
Let's go.
Okay. Hi, Julian.
Hello.
It's an honor that we are having you here today. Thank you so much for your time. I can't thank you enough. It's an honor and a privilege. So thank you.
No worries. I'm excited for the conversation.
Thank you. For those who just joined us, القائد, which translates to the leader in Arabic, hosts leaders from around the world who are experts in different aspects of the Marcom industry. And today we have Julian Cole, who is an absolute megastar on LinkedIn, a strategic planner of a world-class standard. He shares just invaluable information every single day on LinkedIn, all kinds of examples of comm strategies, templates, even procedures. I call him the educator because he's just so generous with what he shares. He also has an academy. It's called Strategy Finishing School, where he brings in students who are interested to develop their comm strategy development skills and different aspects. But please, you go ahead, and if you would like to tell us a little bit about the finishing school. So, yeah.
For sure. So I have been running the Strategy Finishing School for about 4 years. And it came from a realization that I had, which was a lot of people who work as strategists, especially in creative agencies, have never had professional training. And they kind of have put into the role and are just smart thinkers and have had to kind of patch it together of what the job of a strategist is. And that kind of was my past as well. That was my history. I kind of came up and put it all together, and it got to a point where it stopped, kind of halted my career. I'd moved to New York and was working for a bigger agency. I'd started in Australia working at small agencies, and I went to New York, was working for one of the biggest agencies out there, BBH. And I realized that I had this terrible imposter syndrome that was holding me back from achieving what I wanted to achieve as a strategist. And I ended up telling my boss that, ended up learning the fundamentals of strategy, and then went on to head up two of the biggest strategy departments in New York and probably in North America, and then go on to be a strategy consultant to kind of leading brands like Apple, Uber, Disney, Facebook. And so what I realized was I was not alone in that a lot of people are facing that imposter syndrome and just self-doubt. And so that's the reason I set up the Strategy Finishing School. It was a very clear problem. I knew I had the answers. I was able to share how I had done it in my journey and kind of break it down into really simple language. And I think that's probably what also resonates on LinkedIn, where I share kind of a small fraction of what's going on inside the Strategy Finishing School.
That's awesome. It's strategy. I'm a big fan of strategy, but corporate strategy, and of course, from corporate strategy we get all kinds of different strategies, of course. And I like to read and write about it. I find strategy to be kind of challenging. What made you choose strategy? It's a painful job, and now you teach it. So I mean, you're like samurai level, you know?
Yeah. I wouldn't say I'm samurai level. I definitely feel like I'm always learning. And the thing is maybe in corporate strategy, there's probably a little bit more information on how it all kind of works together. But I started in creative agencies, in ad agencies, and in there, I was kind of looking around at the different roles, and I feel like I'm creative, but I also love using my head. And I'd started in account management, And so when I saw this role of strategy and kind of putting all the pieces together, I always loved chess when I was young and playing like strategy role-playing games like Age of Empires. I thought, oh, this sounds like me.
Absolutely.
And I'd also done a thesis on, I'd also studied at university psychology, management, marketing. So that kind of led me down that path. And it was kind of a natural progression in there. And I think for me, with strategy, I've always been quite confident and comfortable in the unknown and working through and trying to work out a process for what's happening in the world and what's happening in this work. And so breaking things down into its simplest parts has always been really something that I've enjoyed and found quite easy. So it was quite natural progression for me to go, okay, let me start teaching this, because I'd already kind of been trying to teach it. And I also came up through a wave of social media. So I started as a social media strategist back in 2008 when MySpace was big, and did a thesis on MySpace and the uses and gratifications of MySpace and Facebook for brands. It was a marketing thesis. And so there I was kind of treading into the unknown because no one really had written the book on social media then. So it felt like I had to teach social media strategy to a lot of clients and to other people. And I enjoyed that. I was blogging from the start, kind of from 2006. And so it naturally, just those two kind of went hand in hand for me. And so when it came to teaching and growing a department and teaching this and upskilling, one of the big parts of a job of a manager and a leader of a department is making sure that the quality of your team is increasing every single year. And so the education part was something that I definitely identified and found easy where other people may not have.
I love it. I absolutely love the story. What young professionals now, they have they're kind of hesitant when it comes to strategy, or whether they do account management or creative. Some actually jump from the different functions of an agency. What kind of advice would you give someone who's kind of hesitant, has cold feet?
I think jumping from place to place is fine, especially when you're younger. Kind of explore and see what works for you. I think the biggest thing is working under people and working at somewhere where you believe in the work, or the quality of the work is higher than what you think you can create by yourself. I think that's the biggest thing that kind of stood out for me in my career, was when I went and worked with people who I really admired from the creative field and accounts, and was working with top quality people. That pushed me to be better. And so I would say, it's clear, like I think there's a saying, you're either earning or learning. I think that's so true. Especially at the start of the career, you want to be learning from the best, getting those good names on your CV and learning at the best places, overtaking the earning in the short term.
Absolutely. I agree. Beginning of my career, I was kind of lost, and I made it like my purpose to learn as much as I could, different functions, different sectors. That's what I enjoyed. You have SOAP, strategy on a paper. I love that. I love it. It's amazing. And you're right. Strategy shouldn't be a long document. I've seen strategies that were just tens and tens of pages. And the thing is, when it comes to Markham, you don't have a standard. That I've noticed, because I joined this industry pretty late in my career. You've got young professionals who join right after university or college, and I joined. I was old. I joined when I was like 33 or something. So it was, but I noticed that there isn't a standard. Like you've got medical professionals, they have to go through a certain pathway to get their license and all that. With Markham, No, it's not like that. So you've got so when you ask someone, hey, give me a comms strategy or develop one, you'll find it all. One would do something and the other person would do something completely different. You standardize it. And I like that. I mean, I really like that. It's organized. There's a procedure. There's certain components that you identify in a comms strategy. That's how it should be. And you have SOAP. You've developed your own thing. You said strategy on a paper. Could you please explain to our viewers what does that mean and how to do it?
Yeah. I think it's a really, like, you've got 2 points there too. I'd love to highlight that Richard Huntington, who's a great strategist out of London, and he said strategy is more like an apprenticeship than, any other, than a profession. It's not a profession, it's more like an apprenticeship. And the reason he said that was because you're 100% correct. We don't have a certain, exam that we sit that says, okay, now you're a qualified strategist. We learn like an apprenticeship where you learn under someone and you learn their skill sets. And so we've got so much variability when it comes to strategy. And again, one of the reasons why I set up the strategy finishing school, the whole idea of it is people are thrown into these strategy roles. A finishing school is, you're already out in the market. These are just the final polishing points that I wanted. And one of those is having a clear definition of how to write a strategy. What is a strategy and how to write a strategy? So that's where the model strategy on a page, which is, as you were saying, is something that I came up with, came from. And it's a very simple formula. It's 1, 2, 3 formula, which is one paragraph, 2 points of view. So from the point of view of the business and the point of view of the consumer. And then it's got 3 parts, which is the goal, the problem, and the solution. And that's what a strategy has. We don't need a strategy if everyone is very clear on the direction we're going and what we need to do. We only need a strategy when it's unclear how to get to the goal, or the goal is unclear. What is identifying the problem that's in the way, and then the solution of how we go around that. So the strategy on a page, 1, 2, 3, which is very simple. Now, the way that I write the strategy on a page is it's got 6 sections to it, and it's meant to be read by anyone within the organization to understand why we're making an investment in advertising and what we're actually doing. So where I start and end is, what's the business goal? I mean, what's the business problem that we're identified, and what's the business goal? How are we getting there? And that's really important, because if you're talking to the CFO, they need to understand, why are we spending this money on advertising? Where is it going? So they are able to read this. So that's the outside. The very first thing is the business problem. The very last thing is the business goal. I call it a nesting sometimes it's like a nesting doll strategy. Those small babushka dolls that sit inside each other. It's very similar to that. So inside the business problem and the business goal sits the consumer problem and the consumer goal. And what I often find with strategists is when they're writing creative briefs, they'll write something like, get young people to be aware of this product or new feature to help sell more of this. And so they think the consumer problem is people are just not aware of our product. And, I see lots of soccer in the background, so let's use a soccer example. So, if someone's trying to promote something like Manchester City, and we're talking about the women's team of Manchester City. I'm sorry, I saw Manchester United there and then the grimace, and I automatically knew I'd made a mistake there. But say we were promoting the women's team. If they're saying to us, the problem is people aren't aware of this, that's the problem of Manchester City, of their marketing team. What we want to know is, what's the consumer problem that's is going to be solved by, you know, a certain demographic watching it. So say we're saying young girls, we want young girls to start watching games of Man City. We then need to work out, well, what's the problem? What's the problem that young girls are facing that watching a game of, watching Man City, the female team play, women's team, what would that solve? And so we'd go and speak to young girls and we'd understand, okay, maybe there's a massive confidence issue. They're not able to see their idols, or they stop playing sport because they don't see it as a path forward. You know, they're losing confidence young. That's a consumer problem that watching a game of Man City, the women's Man City team, that could solve that problem. They say, oh, hey, actually, there's a path for me. I can see a path forward. And so, so that's the difference. It's not that they're not aware of it. That's the business problem. The consumer problem is that. So a consumer problem is they're lacking confidence. So inside that, we then have two parts, which is the insight and the solution. And so the insight for me is it either does one of two things, which is it either reframes the problem. So it shows us a surprising new way. It says this isn't the problem. There's actually a bigger problem that we're addressing, or it shows a surprising new solution. So it's something that people haven't heard before. And this is for most advertising. We have an insight. Not all advertising needs it. Some does. And then we've got the solution, which is sometimes people call this the strategy, is what are we actually going to do? I think the strategy is the whole thing, but what are we actually going to do? So, you know, for the Man City example, well, we just need to show, that you start watching the Man City women's team, your confidence grows, or you can see what you will be in the future. So maybe we just need to show young girls that this is them. Yeah. So we need to show that relationship and how watching a game of soccer actually changes. It's not just exciting to watch, but it actually gives you confidence and changes your life. And so then we go to the consumer goal and the business goal. Consumer goal, build confidence, see your future can be multiple different things, not just you know, not closing the door on sports so early. So that's how it works. So I'll just retell you what the kind of key parts are, because I always struggle with audio. But it starts with the business problem. We then go the consumer problem. We then go the insight, which unlocks the problem. We then do the solution, the consumer goal, and the business goal. And that's a strategy on a page. That's awesome. Absolutely genius. I really love that. Simple, straight to the point. You know, you don't need to be fancy. You don't need, it's right there. I like that a lot. Yeah. I'm glad you mentioned insight. I'm gonna move a little bit, ask you a question on insight. I saw a video that you had on insight, and I was like, why is he doing this? I mean, isn't it obvious that this is where you start? Isn't it obvious for marketers that this is where you should be looking at? I didn't understand. I mean, I'm going to talk to you later about more of your insight videos, but I don't understand. Why did you feel that there was a need for that? Okay, I'll put it back on you. Do you have a clear definition of what an insight is? I don't have a clear definition, but I can come up with one on the spot. I'd say it's something that the consumer is feeling or seeing or sensing, and that's something that research would reveal for me. I would have to have a survey or ask consumers and relate this to the strategic business goal, right? Yeah. Do you think if you asked 5 other people in Marcom, do you think they would all have the same solution, the same definition? They should. Yeah, I don't know. We don't know, but the reason I created it is because I don't think there is clarity around the word insight. So that is why I created it. And so if I was to say what I think the definition of an insight is it's a revelatory truth that shows us a new way around the problem. A revelatory truth. not a
Revelatory
truth.
Okay.
Yeah. So when and
Revelation.
two things there that are really important when I say a revelatory truth around the problem. The first one is it's in Marcom. It always has to deal with a consumer problem. We're not just coming up with any insight, because a lot of people deal in insights. You know, comedians deal in insights, editorial journalists deal in insights, scientists, artists. They're all dealing with insights. So in our case, it's to do with a consumer problem that we can unlock, and then our product solves that. The second part of that was revelatory truth. So when I talk about a truth is a fact. That's something that we can go and observe, and we just know that's true. We nod our head when we hear it. And this is the problem that I have in a lot of decks that I've seen, and I've been guilty of this myself. A lot of decks I've seen, I've called it an insight, and it just might be an interesting truth. It's just like, yeah, that makes sense. A revelatory truth makes us look at something in a completely new way.
Mm-hmm.
So it's always helpful with an example for something when I talk about this. So a revelatory truth will give you a response. You'll actually say something, I never thought of it that way. You gasp, there's some reaction that you have. So that is really important to me. And so when I was working on a competitor to Roomba, the electronic vacuum cleaners, we were looking through reviews, and one of the reviews said, Roomba is like your drunk roommate trying to clean. And I said, that's kind of interesting. And it's true, because if you ever look at a Roomba, it's like very erratic around the room, which is quite funny. And it was actually turned into a massive advantage for the company we were working with, because they were GPS. So it was very, very controlled. But the reason that to me is a revelatory insight is probably maybe I'm assuming you've never put the thought of a drunk roommate and vacuum cleaner together.
Absolutely.
And that makes you look at Roomba in a totally different way now. So that to me is revelatory. The reason it also works is it holds these two big tensions in it. So a tension is, when we think of robots, electronics, we think of mathematical science, very direct. Your drunk roommate is the opposite of science. It's, the emotional, bumbling fool that's kind of going around the room. So that's a really nice tension that it holds as well. So that's what makes that insight work. So I could have said an insight is a truth about Roomba might be, it allows me to be lazy because it cleans for me. Yeah, that's true. And people are nodding their head, and I'm sure a consumer might say that to me, but is that revelatory? No, that's a truth. So, so there is enough, to me, so much that needs to be done around the word insight, and especially, and this, honestly, this is what I'm looking. I'm looking at it from a Marcom perspective, but I think in a lot of business, we see a lot of things. An insight has to be revelatory. It has to be an epiphany. It has to be a penny drop moment. It shows us a completely different way. And it's subjective, but that's what it is. It's not just a broad definition. I've heard very much broad definitions of it's a fact, or it's the way we get to it is, we're not talking about how we get to the insight or anything. It's just like, what is that actual statement? And for me, for a long time, I've worked in strategy for, I'd say 10 years, 15 years. I didn't have a clear articulation of what an insight is. And so myself and working at top agencies, and we would argue in the agencies, what is an insight or what is an idea? So to me, that felt like there was a massive demand for it. And if I look at like on YouTube, that video that I've got, it's one of my like most viewed videos, because it's just like there's A, not much content out there about insights, and then B, it's something people want to know, because the word gets used a lot, but abused.
Yeah, kind of loses its meaning. But I appreciate what you did there. I appreciate that. You identified something and you went to solve it, and it's a pain that you had to go through yourself. So yeah, I agree. I understand. About that video you mentioned, Dos Equis, and you mentioned the video, and it made me remember Hennessy's that character video. I don't know if you've watched that. It's an absolute amazing TVC. It's amazing. I'll send you the link.
Yeah,
it's but it made me think that once a brand unlocks an insight,
yeah,
you kind of feel that all the other brands go and attack that same insight, right? And then it loses its bling. And then how do you come up with original ideas again? How do you come up with originality? It kind of fades away. What's your take on that?
So my thing is, it comes back, like, let's go back to the definition of an insight. It's a revelatory truth that shows us a new way around the problem. Insights are subjective, and they're also timely. So the Dos Equis example that you brought up, which is the most interesting man in the world, the insight behind that is laughable now, like, because everyone knows it, which is people prefer experiences over products. Like that, you put that on a brief and your creative team are groaning because it's like so silly because so many people do it. And so with an insight, it has to be a revelation. It has to be a new way of looking at the problem, and your consumers have to believe that it's shifting their way of seeing something. And the reason why advertising is so obsessed with insights is because we go through the world, we block out advertising. We don't want to look at it. And so the only advertising we will look at is stuff that changes our mindset, or it shows us something in a new way. And oh, that's weird. I never thought of it like that. And so that is why we're so passionate about insights, because we need to change people's frame. If they know what we're going to say, and we're the second brand, like, it's all right. You don't need insights if you're Coca-Cola because you're the top brand. You just need to reiterate Coca-Cola means happiness. Coca-Cola means summer. Coca-Cola means getting the family together. Those three, just boom, 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 slam them over their head. But if you're Pepsi and you're trying to own some of those, what we call like category entry points, no one's going to think about you. You need an insight that's a new way of looking at it. What's our new take on happiness? And so that's where we go looking for insights. So you asked where do you find insights, or how do you get to insights? Well, the first one that you were talking about was talking to consumers. And I think that's a great place to start. But you're looking for certain things that the consumer is saying. And so for me, what I look for when I do consumer interviews is, what is that person saying that's kind of bucking the trend? What's the counter narrative? Everyone's saying this, and we know this is true, but what's the new point of view on happiness? Like that no one else is saying. Everyone's like, happiness means family and friends and being around, friends and doing everything. I want to talk to the person who's like, you know what happiness is? Happiness is me being by myself, away from family, friends, just, time away, like nothing. I'm not, an insight takes like, it needs a counterpoint, but you're looking for someone who's saying the polar opposite, like different point of view on it. And that person is usually closer to the insight. I think there's other tools you can use. So a couple of other ones is, I think journalists who write editorial, so they're not writing the news, day-to-day news, but then they do the editorial, which is talking about something that's being talked about multiple times, a lot of times, they have to find the new angle in. And so you often find insights written in the subheading. The very first sentence, they'll try to write an insight, new way of making you look at a world event. Comedians deal in insights. So the way they do it is, if you look at a joke, a joke, a one-liner is usually set the expectation, shatter the expectation. And so they deal with insights. And there's other places on Reddit, subreddits like shower thoughts and unpopular opinions. And then the final one is I often use tools to help me just push my brain into new places. So one of the tools I use is ChatGPT. And so I try to break ChatGPT. I don't ask it for insights, because if you ask, and then, again, this is more proof of why I needed to do a video on insights. Because if you ask ChatGPT, give me 10 insights about Hilton hotels, it will give you the most generic junk you've ever seen. Mm-hmm. Hilton Hotels is in 67 countries, and Hilton Hotels is the number one for sustainabilities out of hotels. Boring. That's nothing new. The way I use ChatGPT is give me 10 cliches about hotels, and then it'll be like 5-star experience. Another one is like a home away from home and stuff like that. Then what I do is I don't stop there. I say the 10 cliches, because remember, it's a revelatory truth. We're looking at polar opposites. We're trying to see the very opposite of what everyone says. So I just ask, tell me the complete opposite of what this is. And there it says something like, hotels, a place nothing like home. Mm-hmm. And usually you're like, oh, that's not what you want, because you want it to feel homely and nice and you're all comfortable. But actually, maybe that's true. Maybe sometimes home is very stressful. Your kids are crying, you've got washing to do, everything else. And, the main competitor for Hilton Hotels is like Airbnb. So a place that nothing like home, actually, that's starting to work. Like that works as an insight. And so I often use tools to help push me into places that I would never think, the complete opposite of what everyone else is saying. So I'll say 10 cliches, give me the opposite. And then I'll look and see if any of those 10 will actually work. And then I go and speak to consumers and talk to them and say, hey, do you always want to be at home? Like a hotel that feels like home? Do you want? And then try to see the reaction as I say that stuff.
That's genius. I like that. And I'm glad you mentioned AI. I was going to ask you that question, and you just covered it. And the way you explain it, it's like you covered that in your finishing school, and this is just it's awesome. I like that. If I was a brand strategist, I'd sign up for that school, definitely. I wanted to ask you, I've noticed, and I'm generalizing, of course, but Australians, you're from Australia, correct?
Yes.
Australians have a thing for strategy. They're really good at strategy. I don't understand the amount of people who are Australians that I connected with through LinkedIn, who are strategy experts, and they actually know what they're talking about. It's just it's mind blowing. What I wanted to ask you, what's up? Is there something in the food?
I would say that it's a great question. It's a great question. So I think if I'm trying to like logically think through that, because I agree there's a number of people who are like also teaching or open with their knowledge. And at first I'd be like, oh, maybe there's Mark Pollard. I don't know if you follow Mark Pollard, but he's another strategist who's like me in my field, brand strategist, who talks a lot about strategy. So me and him are very vocal about teaching and teach, and not many other people are willing to give their secrets up. So I would say I love history, so I would look to history to explain why this might be. To begin with, we're obviously a country from the Commonwealth, where we look at brand strategy, where strategy came out of. It came out of London. In advertising. Advertising strategy came out in the 60s and 70s, late 60s, 70s in London, and kind of spread over to America, then to, Australia at the same time. So I think we were always going to export strategy. I believe we're very influenced by what happens still over in England. then I would say that the Australian characteristic, if you look at an English person and an Australian person, the idea is, I would say that we're probably more open to sharing information.
True.
Being out there. We've probably got, we're the smaller little brother nipping at the ankles. So we're probably out there to prove something. And so I think maybe that would be why strategy has been so locked up. If I think of like the system over in England, it's hierarchical. It's we often talk like the Oxbridge, those universities where all that knowledge feels like it's behind closed doors.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe in Australia, we didn't feel like we had that opportunity to be around closed doors and more, you needed to learn it and bit of an entrepreneurial spirit, looking overseas to try to understand. And then I guess if we've learnt online, we're going to share and show that as well. So I think maybe that's where it comes from. I've never actually answered this question, and I hope it comes across as correct. But then I look at other countries where I think there's like a burgeoning strategy community and a strong strategy community, and I'd say they kind of share the same qualities as Australia of like entrepreneurial, pull yourself up by your boots and do that. So to me, the other ones are like, I would say New Zealand, Kenya, Nigeria, are probably the ones that come to mind for me, and then maybe Brazil, which all have that kind of entrepreneurial pull up energy, and obviously I'm speaking outside of the big capitals, which is America is, in my industry at least, the biggest place for for strategy. That's where a lot of eyes look, is America and London in advertising strategy world, which I don't think is fair, but it's just the way it is. I think that's where the clients are spending the most money too.
Yeah, makes sense. Very logical answer. And I agree. I found it surprising, and I found it something that I liked. I like that. Brand strategists, they position comm strategy or brand strategy as and I understand they're two different things, but they position brand strategy as everything. And I don't know if you agree, but that's how I feel, that they position it that way. And I disagree with that notion. I disagree with that positioning, because from corporate strategy, business strategy, and then you get the different functional strategies, and then there's marketing strategy, and brand is perception. I mean, that's what I understand. And it should be part of the marketing strategy. Same as comm strategy, it should be part of the marketing strategy. Do you agree with this? And what's your take on that?
I think the impact and scope of brand strategy is all dependent on the size of the company. So when we were doing brand strategy at BBDO, we were dealing with, the biggest brands in the world, AT&T, P&G brands, Unilever. You're dealing with massive brands. The scope of brand strategy in those places is minimal. It is pretty much remit of advertising, and maybe it flows over. Fingers crossed that the CMO can get it to push over into another couple of areas. When you go down to your local startup that's selling supplements, and they're selling it out of out of their backyard, out of their house. Brand strategy often has a bigger remit, can impact a lot more things. And I think that might be due to maybe there's not other strategists in the room. Maybe, within a bigger organization, if you look at P&G, how many different, you just take, just take Dove in P&G. How many people, if you went on LinkedIn right now, how many would have strategy in their title? I would say a hell of a lot of people within that organization. So, they have to be more defined. Brand strategy is very defined, small thing. Then you go down to the supplements company. How many people have got strategy in their title or understand that? Not many. So to me, the scope of brand strategy has to do with the scale of the company. The bigger you get, the smaller the remit.
Awesome. Okay. I've always thought of brand as a reflection of what goes on into the company. If you have your operations, you're working on it. You have your finance, hiring, whatever strategies you're working on. Brand is a reflection of that. That's what because you always start with corporate, and then you work your way to what consumers see. Yeah. But I agree with your take on that. It depends on the size of the company, and it makes sense. I wanted to ask you, let's go back to agencies, please. The job of the strategic planner. Do you feel, and that's what I'm feeling from the region here. Do you feel, I don't know what happens there, and that's the purpose of this conversation. Is it going extinct? Strategic planner as a job now, with all social media taking over and digital's kind of grabbing all that spend, and things have kind of gone tactical a bit. I don't know, what's your take on that?
I don't think so. I think, like, if you look at a strategic planner's role, is they're there to, be the voice of the consumer, the output that they're creating. Like, if we just put marketing briefs through to creatives, or, even through to whatever you want to call it, the digital or social agency, without a creative brief, what you're doing is you're just looking at the problem from the marketer's point of view. Increase awareness of, this supplement company that we've got that has no understanding of the consumer. That's no understanding of what they do. So someone's got to write that creative brief. Could it be a strategic planner? Yes, I think definitely. For bigger brands, if you've got money, you definitely need you should have a strategic planner, someone who's really thinking about that. I think someone who can connect all the dots too. The thing is this was the role that I really played, was more than writing the creative briefs. My role in the bigger agencies was to connect all the dots of all the pieces. So much. If you're creating so much creative, how does it all make sense? What is the connection? What's the red thread between the whole thing? Are you just throwing bricks at a wall, or are you building a wall? And that was my job in comm strategy, is really to build that wall and make sure that whole ecosystem made sense. And you need a strategist to do that. Does it need a person with a title called strategic planner? Maybe not. Maybe someone else can do it. But does someone need to know the fundamentals of how to write a brief and what a good creative brief looks like, and to understand that an insight is not a truth, but it's a revelatory truth? Yes, definitely. I think otherwise you're going to get B+ work. You're going to get B work. You're going to get unremarkable wallpaper work. So I think strategic planning is really valuable. I think a lot of markets find it hard to sell the value of strategy, and I understand it myself as a small business. When I'm working with others, it's constantly like, but what are you creating for me? I don't have time. I don't have money for people to create decks because I'm a small business.
Mm-hmm.
But you get to a certain size and you do want the strategic thinking rather than 100 people off doing random things and nothing connecting.
Awesome. That's the reason you had a post a while back on the process of the brief, what happened was I wrote an article on that, and then I saw your post, and that's the reason I started following you. because you followed the brief from account management to creative, and you said that there's a brief at the beginning, and then it goes to strategic planning, and then there's a creative brief, and it goes to creative. And that, that's what I do. I'm a consultant I'm an operations management consultant for agencies, and I implement ERP systems, work in the jig for agencies, and that's the workflow of the brief. So from day one, this is how it goes in. This is the standard time for each and every step, and because creative, they need this buffer. They need this translation. They think in a different way, and they need someone to take that strong business language and transform it into. I always say, and I had someone, we were discussing this. We say it's an audio or visual representation of the strategic business need. Kind of. I don't know if you agree, but but that's the reason I started following you, and I've been following you ever since, and I love everything you share, and I like that shirt as well, the purple there with the.
Thank you. Yeah, it's
Awesome.
It's always bold. So yeah, that makes sense to me. It's like, I think the thing for me, the biggest change between the client brief or the marketing brief to the creative brief for me is the point of view. For the client brief, it's always from the point of view of the business. What's the business trying to do with marketing? What are we trying to achieve? Where the creative brief is, what's the consumer trying to achieve? What's the problem they're facing, and how does the product play a role here? And I think because the word brief is in both, a lot of clients are like, well, why do I need a creative brief? I've written you the brief, which is, sell more of this product because we've got this new feature. That's not going to solve it. And maybe you're asking, and maybe you've got a great creative team who will translate that into the consumer problem. Maybe they can go and do that research. Someone needs to go and do that research. Someone needs to know why. And maybe it is you've got a great creative, because that's the other thing I know to be true, is that the strategist doesn't hold all the answer. They're a curator rather than the owner of the creative brief. I'm always, when I'm writing a creative brief, it's liaising with the creative director. Which route do you like? What's making sense? And we're working on that together, because I don't know all the answers. I don't have all the insights either. Often the insight comes, like if you look at the Snickers work, You're Not You When You're Hungry, that creative brief and the insight actually got rewritten after a line came from one of the copywriters, and they're like, yep, that's it right there. And then the line informed what the brief was. So thinking that the strategist, have got the only answers is incorrect.
Okay, yeah, but someone has to do it, as you said. And I always tell my clients, if you can't afford to hire a strategic planner, have account management do it. Teach them basics, spend on training, invest in them, but someone has to do it, even if it's someone from the creative team. But yes, I agree. Julian, I can't thank you enough. It's been an honor. I enjoyed our conversation very much. It's absolutely mind-blowing, and all the information you shared. Everyone should check out the Strategy Finishing School. Start following Julian. I'm going to share all your information. And you enjoy the rest of your evening.
I will do. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye-bye.